Thank you, Speaker. I rise to speak on the Environment Protection Reform Bill 2025. There is broad agreement that the Environment Protection Biodiversity Conservation, or EPBC Act, has utterly failed to protect our environment for the past 25 years. We now have 19 ecosystems on the brink of collapse, and we are a global deforestation hotspot along with Bolivia and Brazil. Sadly, I want to begin by saying that I cannot support these environmental reforms in these bills in their current form, because quite simply they do not guarantee protection for our nature. The EPBC Act is the one piece of national legislation we have to protect our environment. It should be our nation's safeguard for the environment, the framework that ensures our forests, rivers, oceans and wildlife are not irretrievably polluted and destroyed, but protected for future generations. This package of reforms was intended to fix our national environment laws, but instead they risk entrenching the very weaknesses of the current EPBC Act that have allowed Australia's environment to decline so sharply. It is well understood that business needs greater certainty when it comes to project approvals. For Australia to meet our climate goals and unlock the enormous potential of renewable energy, we need clear, consistent and trusted environment laws. But right now, many projects, including renewable energy products, are being delayed or bogged down in confusion. Communities, investors and industry are all calling for the same thing, an approval process that is efficient, transparent and fair. Businesses need clarity on how decisions are made, and they need to know if they put forward a strong, environmentally sound proposal, they'll get a fast yes. And if a project isn't up to scratch, they'll get a fast no, so they can move on, refine their plans, not waste money and invest with confidence elsewhere. That's what a well-functioning system delivers: speed, certainty and integrity. But this cannot come at the expense of nature. A healthy environment underpins a healthy economy. The two work hand in hand. So it is critical that this time around our nature protection laws do actually protect nature, and we don't see another 25 years of environmental neglect. Because once ecosystems are destroyed, once species are extinct, no amount of economic activity or offsetting can bring them back. The people of Mackellar understand deeply the need to protect nature. They want their children and grandchildren to have the same connection to the coast, the creeks and the wild beauty that we've been lucky enough to grow up with. And that's why they've asked me, as their representative, time and time again, to push for strong reforms to our national environment laws and to stop the destruction of our unique ecosystems, plants and animals that has occurred relentlessly in this country over the past few decades. They want a system that protects our environment and provides predictable, efficient decision-making for business. This is entirely possible, but these reforms are not it. I have a number of concerns about these reforms that I'll go through in detail. Let me turn to the first major concern, the new national interest exemption. Under this provision, the Environment Minister could approve a project even if it breaches what are deemed to be unacceptable impacts to the environment, so long as the Minister deems it is in the national interest. That's an enormous power. It effectively lets the Minister override the law, and to do so without having to explain why. Because while the Minister must generally publish a copy of the decision together with the reasons, this accountability mechanism can itself be avoided when the Minister believes it is in Australia's national interest to not provide these details. Ken Henry has warned that the national interest test in these reforms is likely to incentivise significant lobbying from developers, as they are all absolutely convinced that their project is in the national interest. The legislation cites projects relating to defence, security and national emergencies as the type of projects that might attract the exemption, and the Environment Minister has confirmed it could be used for something like a rare earth mine or gas project if that was what the Minister of the day decided. But at the end of the day, the minister only needs to be satisfied that the action is in Australia's national interest. It doesn't take much imagination to think about how this could be exploited. In fact, earlier this year, opposition leader Peter Dutton said he would use the existing national interest test to fast-track the North West Shelf gas extension, a project that the Australia Institute estimates would release around 90 million tonnes of emissions every year, equivalent to building 12 new coal-fired power stations. This isn't about whether you trust the current minister, it's about what a future government, perhaps one less committed to protecting our environment, could do with such sweeping discretion. And that brings me to the next serious flaw, the bill's over-reliance on ministerial discretion throughout. The Samuel Review found that the existing EPBC Act insufficiently constrains decision-maker discretion, leading to uncertainty and poor environmental outcomes. Yet, rather than curtail ministerial discretion, these reforms expand and entrench it. Key decisions and tests throughout the bill depend on whether the minister is satisfied that something is the case, or whether an action is not inconsistent with national environment standards. That kind of subjective language weakens the law. The new environmental standards, which are meant to be the centrepiece of this reform, are riddled with this type of language and subjectivity. For example, an approval must not be inconsistent with a standard, but only if the minister is satisfied that's the case. Another, the no-regression principle, which is meant to ensure standards don't go backwards, applies only to the satisfaction of the minister. The provision requiring approvals to pass the net gain test, which is an important guardrail on the offset provisions, is subject to the satisfaction of the minister. There is also a high level of discretion available to the minister in providing for declarations or bilateral agreements to devolve powers to the states and territories, along with many other crucial checks and safeguards. Indeed, earlier this year, when there was a threat to the EPBC Act, when there was a threat that the EPBC Act might actually be used to protect a species, the Maugean skate, the government stepped in and amended the bill. This is not the strong, objective framework the Samuel Review recommended. Next, to the carve-outs and blanket exemptions. For decades, exemptions in the EPBC Act have allowed destructive activities to continue without federal assessment or approval, even when they impacted threatened species or critical habitats. The most glaring examples are the regional forestry agreements, which exempt native forest logging from the EPB's oversight, and the continuous use or prior authorisation exemptions relied upon proponents of agricultural land clearing. Since the EPBC Act was introduced more than 2 decades ago, our environment has only declined further. Australia is now the only developed nation on the list of the global deforestation hotspots. Our forests are being bulldozed at pace, pushing species like koala, greater glider and grey-headed flying fox to the brink of extinction. And while the government has said that the national standards will apply to forestry activities, it's difficult to see how this will work in practice, given that the proposed standards do not yet exist and given forestry activities are exempt from the Act. And I simply do not accept that the native forest logging should be exempt from our national environment laws, on the basis that state laws can be relied upon instead. You need to look no further than my home state of New South Wales to see why. In New South Wales, environmental requirements have been repeatedly breached by the New South Wales Forestry Corporation. In a judgment in the New South Wales Land and Environment Court last year, Justice Rachel Pepper noted that Forestry Corporation's lengthy record of prior convictions for environmental offences, including polluting a forest waterway, inadequate threatened species surveys, unlawful harvesting of hollow-bearing trees, and harvesting in koala and rainforest habitat exclusion zones. That's why I'll be moving amendments to this bill to repeal the exemption for the regional forestry agreements and the continuous use exemption. Another concern is the devolution of federal powers to state and territory governments, particularly in relation to the water trigger. The bill empowers the minister to accredit state processes and enter into bilateral agreements so that states can assess and approve projects on behalf of the Commonwealth. While this could improve efficiency, it comes with an enormous risk. Of particular concern, the water trigger will be available for devolution despite being specifically excluded from bilateral approval agreements and regional plans in the current laws. Next, I'm deeply concerned regarding the approach to offsetting. There is no requirement for developers to avoid or reduce damage before moving to offsets under the mitigation hierarchy, only that the minister must consider the hierarchy. This will likely entrench offsetting as the default option rather than the last resort. The net gain test is designed to ensure that actions cannot be approved unless impacts on protected matters are offset through actions that result in a net gain. However, concerningly, this can be satisfied through the payment of a restoration contribution charge to the restoration contributions holder. This allows for habitat-destroying developments to be deemed to have a net gain on a protected matter despite the impact being irreversible. The proponent can simply pay into the fund and thereby bypass the true net gain test, and there are no provisions requiring adequate accounting for delivery of the net gain. The reform package also establishes a National Environmental Protection Authority, NEPA, which is welcome in principle. But there is a glaring flaw. The government has chosen not to create a governing board, and there is no independent appointment process for the CEO. This is exactly the kind of political appointment risk I've tried to address through my own Ending Jobs for Mates private members bill to ensure independent and transparent selection processes for key public roles. Without those safeguards, NEPA risks being just another arm of government rather than a truly independent watchdog. We've seen state-based environmental regulators marred with this type of controversy. In New South Wales, the EPA was recently accused of burying a report on lead contamination in children's blood to placate mining companies. In the Northern Territory, the EPA chair was involved in decisions on a major gas leak scandal without disclosing his paid role with an industry lobbying firm. And in Western Australia, the EPA was forced to withdraw its 2019 emissions offset guidelines after intense pressure from the gas industry and the state government. When regulators appear to be bending to political or industry pressure, whether that bending is real or perceived, public confidence evaporates. If we want to rebuild trust, this regulator must be genuinely independent, properly resourced and protected from political meddling. Finally, we cannot talk about the environmental protection in 2025 without talking about climate change. Yet these reforms studiously avoided. Unsurprisingly, the government has again refused to include a climate trigger, a mechanism that would require assessment of a project's greenhouse gas emissions as part of environmental approvals. The International Court of Justice's recent advisory opinion confirmed that countries like Australia are bound by international law to assess and limit greenhouse gas emissions, including those from exported coal and gas. While the government argues that the safeguard mechanism already regulates emissions, this only applies after a project is operating. It doesn't stop new, high-polluting projects from being approved in the first place. In the last term alone, the government approved 27 new coal, oil and gas projects, with 4 new approvals this term. Their combined lifetime emissions are expected to exceed 6.5 billion tonnes of CO2. A reformed EPBC Act that ignores climate is a reform that fails to meet the moment. This reform is an opportunity, a once-in-a-generation chance to fix our broken system, restore trust and put nature at the heart of decision-making while providing a more efficient process for business and investment. But as it stands, the bill does not do that. It risks repeating the very mistakes of the annual review that warned us about. too much discretion, too little accountability and too many loopholes. I urge the government to work with the crossbench, to listen to the experts and to strengthen this legislation so it genuinely delivers for our environment, our economy and future generations. Thank you.